He has no talent. That is what they said about Ravishing Rick Rude, and these four wrestlers made sure the whole world saw it. But how did a man so obsessed with image and control end up humiliated, stripped, mooned, and betrayed in front of millions? This is the story of a wrestler who invited his own downfall through pure arrogance. Rick Rude walked into every arena like he owned it. He acted like the fans should be grateful just to see him. He treated his fellow wrestlers like they were beneath him, and he believed that his perfect body gave him the right to do whatever he wanted. But in wrestling, nobody is untouchable. No matter how good you look, no matter how many titles you hold, if you disrespect people long enough, they will find a way to make you pay, and Rick Rude paid. He paid in the most public, most embarrassing ways possible. Rick Rude was not just another guy in wrestling tights. He came to the World Wrestling Federation in the late 1980s with a big resume. He had already won the NWA World Tag Team Championship with Manny Fernandez in 1986. He held titles like the NWA American Heavyweight Championship. He even won the World Class World Heavyweight Championship. When Rude walked into the WWF, he was already a proven champion. He was not some nobody, he was the real deal. But Rick Rude had a problem. He was in love with himself. His whole character was built on one simple idea. He was better than everyone else. Before every match, Rude would grab the microphone. He would insult the men in the crowd. He called them fat, out of shape, SummerSlam sweat hogs. Then he would turn to the women. He would flex his muscles. He would tell them how lucky they were to look at him. His body was perfect. His hair was perfect. Everything about him screamed vanity, and that vanity would become his biggest weakness. This was not just a gimmick. This was who Rude really was. He believed his own hype. He thought that because he had muscles and good looks, he was untouchable. He thought that championships and titles meant he could do whatever he wanted. He thought wrong, because in wrestling, respect is not given, it is earned. And Rude never learned that lesson. He demanded respect while giving none. He wanted loyalty while showing none. He expected the world to bow down to him, but the world does not work that way. And the wrestling world definitely does not work that way. Rude's gimmick was powerful because it was so easy to hate. He demanded respect but gave none. He wanted control but refused to earn it. And when you build your whole life on being untouchable, people will do anything to touch you. They will humiliate you. They will strip you. They will betray you. And that is exactly what happened. The first man to truly disrespect Rick Rude was Jake the Snake Roberts. This feud was not just about wrestling. It was personal, it was cruel, and it all started because Rude could not keep his hands to himself. In April 1988, Rude appeared on Superstars of Wrestling. He did something unforgivable. He tried to seduce Jake Roberts' wife, Cheryl, right there on television. Cheryl was not a wrestler. She was just a woman who loved her husband. But Rude did not care. He made aggressive advances toward her. He treated her like she was part of the show, like she was his property. Cheryl slapped him hard, right across the face. The crowd went wild, but Rude was not done. He was furious. He decided to take his revenge to a new level. On September 10th, 1988, Rude wrestled a match. He hit his finishing move, the Rude Awakening. Then he did what he always did. He pulled down his wrestling trunks to show off his body, but this time was different. Underneath his trunks, he wore another pair of tights, and on those tights was the airbrushed face of Cheryl Roberts, Jake's wife. Rude had put her face on his body. He was claiming ownership of another man's wife in the most public way possible. Jake Roberts snapped. He stormed the ring. He attacked Rude with everything he had. And then in front of thousands of fans, Jake ripped those tights right off Rude's body. He tore away the violation. He reclaimed his wife's honor. The crowd erupted. This was not just a wrestling angle. This was real emotion, real fury, and it changed everything. What makes this even worse for Rude is that Jake Roberts was going through serious personal problems at the time. He was struggling with addiction. His life was falling apart. But even in his darkest moments, Jake had more honor than Rude ever showed. That is the tragedy of Rick Rude. He had everything: health, talent, success. But he used it all to hurt people. He used it to cross lines that should never be crossed. He attacked a man's marriage. He attacked a man's family. And when that man fought back, even the biggest villain in wrestling became a hero. That is how low Rudy went. Before this feud, Jake Roberts was a heel. He was a bad guy. But after Rude crossed this line, Jake became a hero. The fans loved him. They cheered for him because what Rude did was so wrong, so disgusting, that even the villain became the good guy. That is how far Rude pushed it. He went so far that he made a snake-wielding villain look like a saint, and all because he could not control his arrogance. The second act of disrespect came from the Ultimate Warrior. This feud was different. It was loud, it was violent, and it blurred the line between fake wrestling and real hatred. The feud started with a super pose down at the Royal Rumble in January 1989. Warrior won the contest. Rude was furious. He attacked Warrior with a steel workout bar. The two men hated each other from that moment on. The rivalry centered on the Intercontinental Championship. Rude won the title from Warrior at WrestleMania 5, but Warrior got it back at SummerSlam 1989. Back and forth they went. And just like he did with Jake Roberts, Rude wore tights with his opponent's face on them. This time, it was Warrior's face. Rude was trying to mock him. He was trying to show that he owned Warrior's image. But Warrior did not care about tights. He cared about respect. The real disrespect happened backstage, and it was brutal. There was real hatred between these two men. One day in Toronto, Warrior was backstage. He was talking trash about Rude. He was saying things behind Rude's back. When Rude arrived at the arena and heard about it, he did not wait. He found Warrior, and he beat him. Not in a scripted match, not in front of cameras. This was a real fight. Rude reportedly dominated Warrior. He beat him so badly that it almost ended Warrior's career. Think about that. Warrior was known as one of the toughest, most intense wrestlers in the business, but Rude destroyed him in a real fight. This was not choreographed. This was not part of the show. This was Rude's ego and temper exploding into violence. Vince McMahon, the owner of the WWF, almost fired Rude over the incident. It was that serious. Rude's inability to accept criticism, his need to prove himself physically, nearly cost him everything. He disrespected the business. He disrespected his co-worker, and he put both of their careers at risk, all because he could not handle someone talking bad about him. Here is the thing about real fights in wrestling. They are the ultimate sign of unprofessionalism. Wrestling is a business. It is a show. Wrestlers are supposed to work together to tell stories, but Rude could not separate his character from reality. He let his ego take over. He let his pride control him, and he nearly destroyed both his career and Warrior's career in the process. Warrior may have talked trash, but Rude took it to a dangerous level. He proved that behind all the muscles and the pretty face was just an insecure man who could not handle criticism. That is not strength. That is weakness. The third act of disrespect was the most humiliating, and it came from Rowdy Roddy Piper. Piper was chaos in human form. He did not care about rules. He did not care about elegance, and he certainly did not care about Rick Rude's precious image. At SummerSlam 1989, Rude defended his Intercontinental Championship against the Ultimate Warrior. The match was important. Rude needed to win. He needed to prove himself. But Roddy Piper had other plans. Piper showed up at ringside. He was not supposed to be in the match. He was just there to cause trouble, and cause trouble he did. In the middle of the match, Piper did something outrageous. He lifted up his kilt, and he mooned Rick Rude. He showed his bare backside to the whole world, and more importantly, he showed it to Rude. Rude was so distracted that he lost focus, and in that moment, Warrior capitalized. He pinned Rude. He won the Intercontinental Championship. Rude lost his title because a man showed him his butt. Think about that. All of Rude's talk about being ravishing, about being in control, about being the best-looking man in wrestling, and he lost his championship because of crude, childish humor. For a man whose entire identity was built on vanity and sex appeal, this was the ultimate insult. Piper turned Rude's sophistication into a joke. He took away Rude's control with one simple, vulgar act, and Rude could do nothing about it. He was powerless. All his muscles, all his arrogance, all his carefully crafted image, and he was beaten by a man's naked rear end. It was humiliating. It was public, and it was perfect. Roddy Piper understood something that Rude never did. He understood that wrestling is entertainment. It is about connecting with the crowd. It is about having fun. Rude took himself too seriously. He believed that being serious and being vain made him important. But Piper showed him the truth. You can be funny and still be respected. You can be crude and still be loved. But you cannot be arrogant and expect people to care when you fail. Piper made millions of fans laugh that night, and every single one of those laughs was at Rick Rude's expense. That is the price of vanity. That is the price of taking yourself too seriously. The fourth and final act of disrespect came years later, and it was the most complex. This time, Rude was the one doing the disrespecting, but the man who enabled it was Jerry the King Lawler. In 1997, wrestling was in the middle of the Monday Night Wars. The WWF and WCW were battling for ratings, and a smaller company, ECW, was fighting to survive. Lawler was a WWF wrestler who invaded ECW. He brought along Rob Van Dam and Sabu. Their goal was to destroy ECW from the inside. Rick Rude had joined ECW as a commentator. He was retired from wrestling because of injuries, but he was still part of the show. When Lawler and his crew attacked ECW, Rude sided with the ECW loyalists, or so it seemed. At Heatwave 1997, there was a six-man cage match. It was Lawler, Rob Van Dam, and Sabu against Tommy Dreamer, the Sandman, and Rick Rude. This was supposed to be ECW's chance to fight back. Rude was supposed to help defend the company, but Rude had other plans. During the match, Rude turned on his partners. He threw chairs into the cage. He locked the door, trapping Dreamer and the Sandman inside. Then he watched as Lawler, RVD, and Sabu destroyed them. Lawler hit Dreamer so hard with a Singapore cane that Dreamer had to be hospitalized. The betrayal was complete. Rude did not care about ECW. He did not care about his partners. He only cared about himself. He used ECW as a platform. He pretended to be loyal, but when it mattered, he sided sided with the bigger, more powerful WWF. Jerry Lawler did not force Rude to betray anyone. He simply gave Rude the opportunity, and Rude took it, because loyalty meant nothing to him. Respect meant nothing to him. He was a mercenary. He was a sellout. And the entire ECW locker room knew it. This betrayal shows the real Rick Rude. Not the character on television, not the muscles and the arrogance, but the man underneath. A man who would abandon his partners to save himself. A man who would side with power instead of principle. Tommy Dreamer and the Sandman trusted him. They went into that cage believing Rude had their backs, and Rude stabbed them in the back instead. He locked them in a cage to be beaten. Dreamer ended up in the hospital because of Rude's betrayal. That is not wrestling. That is cruelty. That is cowardice. And that is who Rick Rude really was. So what do all these stories tell us? They tell us that Rick Rude was a man who could not escape his own ego. He started feuds he could not finish. He crossed lines he should never have crossed. He disrespected the people around him, and when they fought back, they fought hard. Jake Roberts stripped him in front of thousands. Ultimate Warrior beat him backstage so badly that Vince McMahon almost fired him. Roddy Piper mooned him and cost him a championship. Jerry Lawler exposed him as a traitor. Every single time, Rude's arrogance was his downfall. He thought he was untouchable. He thought his looks and his muscles made him invincible, but he was wrong. The truth is that Rick Rude was great at what he did. He was a talented wrestler. He had the body. He had the skills. He held championships. He headlined major events. But his greatness was overshadowed by his inability to respect others. He invited disrespect because he gave it so freely. He demanded control but could not control himself. He wanted to be ravishing, but all he ended up being was humiliated. Rick Rude was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2017. That is an honor. That is recognition. But even his Hall of Fame legacy is defined by the disrespect he endured. Fans do not remember him for his titles. They remember him for getting his tights ripped off by Jake Roberts. They remember him getting mooned by Roddy Piper. They remember him getting beaten up backstage by Ultimate Warrior. They remember him betraying ECW for Jerry Lawler. Wrestling is about storytelling, and the best stories are the ones where the villain gets what he deserves. Rick Rude was a villain, a great one, but his story is not one of triumph. It is a story of a man who thought he was too good for the world, and the world proved him wrong. Over and over again, every time Rude tried to prove his superiority, someone knocked him down. Every time he tried to humiliate someone else, he ended up humiliated himself. That is karma. That is justice. And that is exactly what Rude deserved. He spent his entire career disrespecting others. He crossed personal boundaries. He started real fights. He betrayed his partners. And in the end, he is not remembered as a champion. He is remembered as the guy who got embarrassed. Again and again and again. The wrestling business is built on respect. Respect for your opponents. Respect for the fans. Respect for the business itself. Rick Rude had none of that. He thought respect was something you could demand. He thought respect came from muscles and good looks. He thought respect was about dominance and control. But he was wrong. Respect comes from how you treat others. It comes from loyalty. It comes from honor. And Rude had none of those things. Some wrestlers become legends because of what they accomplished. Others become legends because of how they failed. Rick Rude is the second kind. His failures were spectacular. His humiliations were unforgettable. And every single one was his own fault. He had the looks. He had the moves. He had the mouth. But Rick Rude, he had no talent for staying respected. And in the end, that is what cost him. Not his opponents, not bad luck, but his own arrogance, his own ego, his own refusal to see that respect is earned, not demanded. And that is why, when we look back at Rick Rude's career, we do not see a champion. We see a man who was humiliated by everyone he tried to humiliate first. That is his legacy. That is his story. That is the truth about Ravishing Rick Rude.